You're about to hear something that was never meant to reach you. A story that Mexico's history books buried under layers of patriotic myth and selective amnesia. A truth so corrosive, it eats through the illusion of safety you've been taught to believe in. Picture this: Mexico City, winter of 1892. The gas lamps throw pale halos onto cobblestone streets, their light swallowed quickly by the cold mist rising from the lakebed below the city. The carriages roll quietly, wheels muffled by damp air. But in one particular street, Tuba Street, something else pierces the silence. Screams. Not the cries of thieves caught in the act or the violence of political unrest. Those were familiar sounds. No, these were high, sharp, desperate, like steel wire pulled to the breaking point. And they came from behind the walls of a mansion belonging to a woman so respected, so untouchable, that even the police hesitated before knocking on her door. Her name was Guadalupe Martinez de Bejarano. A widow draped in the armor of piety and high society. A benefactor to the church. A provider of opportunities for poor country girls. The perfect portrait of virtue. But behind her carved wooden doors, she was perfecting an art no one dared suspect: the systematic breaking of the human spirit, and the quiet disposal of those whose usefulness had expired. This is the story of Mexico's first documented female serial killer. But it is more than a story. It is an anatomy of how darkness survives, not in shadows, but in the brightest rooms of society. Because what Guadalupe did was not a madwoman's frenzy. It was deliberate, disciplined, and executed in a way only the powerful understand. And once you hear the full truth, you won't look at any position of authority the same way again. To understand her rise, you must first understand her stage. Mexico City in the late 19th century was a city of contrasts sharpened into cruelty. President Porfirio Diaz's modernization campaign brought European boulevards, iron balconies, and electric lamps. But just beyond the glow of progress lay barrios where families starved in crumbling tenements. The poor didn't just lack food, they lacked visibility. To the elite, they were background noise, as forgettable as the dust that settled on carriage wheels. And for someone like Guadalupe, this invisibility was not a tragedy. It was opportunity. At 43, she had mastered the art of appearances. Her black widow's dress and perfectly coiled hair signaled mourning, respectability, and restraint. Her patronage of church charities masked her true intentions. Her business placing young women as domestic servants was seen as a noble act, a pipeline for rural girls to escape poverty. In truth, it was a hunting ground. Every girl who passed through her hands was assessed like livestock: age, obedience, isolation. She preferred the ones whose eyes carried the quiet desperation of having no one in the world. And here lies the first hidden truth. Predators rarely hunt in the wild. They build pens. They design systems that deliver prey to them, pre-selected, pre-weakened, and grateful for the privilege. Her home on Tuba Street was both fortress and laboratory. The front rooms glittered with polished furniture, imported curtains, and sacred art. But deep below, the air was colder, heavier. Down there, the rules changed. Guadalupe did not simply punish, she studied. Each girl's reactions were catalogued. What made her flinch? What made her cry? What made her beg? She treated human pain like a craftsman treats raw material. And once she perfected the process, she no longer stopped at pain. She crossed into the realm where breath itself became optional. January 18th, 1887. The mist clung low over the streets, swallowing the edges of every building. That morning, 16-year-old Casimira Juarez arrived at Guadalupe's door. She had walked for days from Michoacán, carrying everything she owned in a single cloth bundle. Her parents were gone, cholera victims. Her village priest had given her a letter to Señora Bejarano, known for her charitable work. Guadalupe took one look and decided. Perfect. Young. Alone. Grateful. The kind of girl who would confuse control for kindness. The first days were a gentle trap. Warm meals, a clean bed, soft instructions. Guadalupe praised her for her manners, her posture, the neat braid in her hair. Casimira thought she had found refuge. But Guadalupe was already measuring her. How quickly did she blush when criticized? How much physical discomfort could she take before tears came? How long could she stand without moving? The change came slowly. First, small corrections. An imaginary speck of dust, a wrinkle in a bedsheet. Then the punishments, standing still for hours, meals withheld for clumsiness, scrubbing floors until her palms bled. Casimira's gratitude shifted to confusion, then fear. She could not understand that she was no longer being trained. She was being conditioned. Aurelio, Guadalupe's son, watched from the shadows, opium haze dulling his dread. He had seen these lessons before, but never pushed so far. When he tried to intervene, his mother's voice turned cold. Perhaps you'd like to join her in learning obedience. By February, Casimira had entered the basement for the first time. The air was damp. The stone walls swallowed sound. The tools hanging from hooks were clean, polished, prepared. Guadalupe didn't just want to punish. She wanted to reshape the soul until the body collapsed in gratitude for the release of death. The basement was her kingdom. Originally built for storage, it had become a private theater where Guadalupe played both torturer and audience. Casimira stood naked in the cold air, her skin goose-fleshed, her eyes wide with a fear that barely dared to hope. Guadalupe circled her slowly, the clink of her keys echoing off the walls. She spoke softly, almost tenderly, as she pointed out the flaws in the girl's body. "You've let yourself become ugly," she whispered. "But I will fix you." On the far side of the room, a brazier glowed. Metal rods rested in its heat until they shimmered orange. Guadalupe picked one up with deliberate slowness, letting the girl's terror bloom before contact was made. The burns were quick, precise, calculated to cause agony without ending the game too soon. Between sessions, Guadalupe applied ointments to the wounds, not out of mercy, but to prepare the canvas for another round. She understood healing times, nerve sensitivity, and the exact point where pain blurred into delirium. Casimira's sense of reality began to fracture. She confessed to sins she hadn't committed. She thanked Guadalupe for correcting her. She believed she deserved every lash, every burn. Aurelio could hear the muffled screams through the floorboards. He wrote in his journal, February 15th. "The screams are worse. She says it's for the girl's moral improvement, but I've seen her eyes. She enjoys this." By early March, the girl's heart gave out mid-session. Death came not as a shock, but as an inconvenience to Guadalupe. She wrapped the body in sheets, loaded it onto a cart, and buried it under the city's expanding outskirts. The act did not satisfy her. It awakened her. She would need more. A year of silence followed. To the outside world, Guadalupe became the embodiment of virtue. She organized fundraisers for the cathedral, expanded her domestic placement business, and entertained Mexico City's most prestigious families in her salon. But every polite conversation, every charitable gesture, was camouflage for the hunger that gnawed inside her. She replayed Casimira's lessons in her mind, analyzing what could be improved, not out of regret, but efficiency. She needed girls with no defenders, no papers, no reason for the authorities to investigate their disappearance. And she needed her next subjects to last longer. She studied restraint techniques, anatomy, and psychological conditioning. Then, in September 1888, Maria Santos arrived with her 15-year-old daughter, Elena. Poverty had driven them from their farm. Work was scarce. Guadalupe offered the girl a position instantly. Elena's spirit was strong. That made her valuable. Breaking strength was more gratifying than crushing the weak. The process began with subtlety. Weeks of mild criticism, small punishments for imagined errors. A tepid meal withheld here, an hour of stillness enforced there. The basement remained unseen, its shadow hanging like a threat. Guadalupe never struck without purpose. She let days pass between punishments so Elena could adjust, making each escalation feel reasonable. By the time the girl realized she was trapped, her will was already eroded. Aurelio protested again. His mother disarmed him with poisoned logic. "Would you rather I sent her to the streets? She'd end up in sin. I'm saving her." The implication was clear. Interference would make him the next pupil. By December, Elena was a hollow-eyed shell, reacting to commands like an automaton. The basement was ready for her. When Guadalupe finally brought Elena downstairs, she did so without anger, without shouting. She spoke in the same measured tone she used to negotiate with bishops and businessmen. The girl was ordered to undress. Every shiver, every tremor was noted. Guadalupe touched her shoulder with a feather, then with a hot iron. She studied the contrast in reactions. Punishment was no longer random. It was a curriculum. Hours of isolation in the dark cellar to disorient the senses. Sudden bursts of pain to shatter the illusion of safety. Long stretches of silence broken by whispered degradations that rewrote Elena's sense of self. Between sessions, she was fed just enough to keep her alive, not enough to restore strength. Her mind began to warp under the constant pressure of deprivation and fear. Aurelio's journal recorded the descent. December 14th. She no longer cries. She only stares. Mother says that means she's improving. Guadalupe learned to savor the small details. The flinch at the sound of keys. The way the girl's eyes followed the glow of heated metal. The quiver in her voice when she tried to remember prayers. This was no longer about discipline or correction. It was about domination. The reshaping of another human being into something that existed only for her will. And Guadalupe knew she was getting better. Her victims vanished without trace. Families assumed they had run away. The police, reluctant to pry into the affairs of an influential widow, accepted her explanations without question. This was the second truth you were never meant to learn. Power does not hide evil. It protects it. Guadalupe's social standing was her shield. Every handshake, every donation, every appearance at Mass reinforced the illusion of innocence. The people who could have stopped her were the same people who relied on her services. By 1890, she had refined her methods into a formula. Girls were brought in, broken down, and discarded at her discretion. Each case taught her something new about human endurance, about the fragile thread between obedience and collapse. But she was not reckless. She paced herself. Too many disappearances too quickly would attract attention. Her cruelty was patient, disciplined. The cruelty of someone who saw herself not as a criminal, but as an artist. And in her mind, the basement was her studio. The marshlands behind the farmhouse had always been alive with sound. Frogs croaking, crickets chirping, and the distant howl of wolves. But on the night of October 12, 1803, a strange hush fell over it. The air seemed heavy, almost choking. That night, a young boy named Samuel Harper wandered too close to the property. He had been sent by his father to retrieve a runaway cow, but instead, he stumbled upon something else entirely. A shape dragging a sack across the mud. It wasn't a sack full of grain. When Samuel's foot slipped, the figure turned. The moon caught its face, revealing it to be not Ezekiel Borden, but his daughter Mary. Her dress was soaked in something darker than water. She smiled at him, not kindly, but as if she were deciding whether she had time to chase him. Samuel ran until his lungs burned. He never spoke of it, not until years later when the bodies began to surface. That night's silence wasn't natural. It was as if the marsh knew what was being fed to it. Image prompt. Cinematic night scene of 1800s Kentucky marshland under moonlight. Young boy sees blood-soaked woman dragging sack. Eerie fog. Realistic dark tones. By late summer, rumors had spread as far as Louisville. A widow named Abigail Reed came to the county in search of her missing son, Thomas, who had last been seen working as a hired hand for the Bordens. Abigail was not the type to be intimidated. She marched to the farmhouse, demanding answers from Ezekiel himself. He greeted her politely, offered tea, and swore her son had left weeks ago to seek fortune in the West. But Abigail noticed details. The faint smell of iron in the air, a scrap of her son's coat caught on a fence post, the way Ezekiel's wife, Martha, avoided her eyes. That night, she returned with a lantern, creeping toward the barn. She saw shadows moving inside, the sound of something heavy being dragged. Then, the lantern light caught the unmistakable outline of a boot, one she knew belonged to her son. Abigail screamed, but a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. By morning, she too had vanished. In 1805, a drought hit the county, draining parts of the marsh. What emerged from the mud was not simply dry earth, but fragments of human remains. Bones gnawed at the ends, skulls split open. The smell was so foul that even seasoned hunters gagged. Local boys playing in the area stumbled upon what they thought was a hollow log, only to find it was a crude box, nailed shut. Inside were 3 skeletons, 2 small and 1 adult, stacked like firewood. Word reached the sheriff, but when he and his deputies arrived at the Borden farm to investigate, they found the gates chained shut. Ezekiel claimed the drought had revealed old burial grounds from the war. The sheriff left unconvinced but powerless without formal charges. Meanwhile, more pits began appearing in the drying marsh, each holding secrets the Bordens had hoped would never surface. One autumn evening in 1806, a drifter named Silas Kane knocked on the Borden door. He was looking for a night's shelter in exchange for work. The family welcomed him warmly. He later told a tavern keeper in town that they had served him the best stew he'd ever tasted, though something about the meat was strange. Silas decided to leave before dawn, unnerved by the way Mary Borden watched him eat, her eyes unblinking. But as he walked through the fog toward the main road, he heard footsteps behind him. Then, the sound of a rope tightening. Silas was never seen again. The tavern keeper swore that a week later, he saw Mary wearing a coat identical to Silas's, only smaller, as if tailored to fit her frame. In 1807, flames lit up the night sky above the Borden farm. Locals rushed to help, but Ezekiel met them at the gate, rifle in hand, shouting for everyone to leave. The fire consumed the barn, and with it, whatever was stored inside. Some swore they heard screams, not of animals, but of people, trapped behind the barn's locked doors. Others claimed the smell was not of burning wood, but of something far worse. By morning, the barn was ash. The Bordens claimed it was an accident. No one believed them. In early 1808, the sheriff who had once investigated the marsh disappearances returned with a warrant. He rode toward the Borden farm at dawn. By midday, his horse returned without him, reins dragging in the dirt. A search party combed the property, but found no trace. In the cellar, they discovered fresh sawdust covering what looked like dark stains on the floor. Ezekiel claimed it was spilled molasses. The sheriff's badge was found weeks later, hanging from a nail in the smokehouse. By 1809, the governor's office could no longer ignore the growing number of missing persons linked to the Bordens. Armed militia surrounded the farm. The Bordens were taken into custody without resistance, except for Mary, who fought like a cornered animal, biting and clawing until restrained. Inside the house, investigators found ledgers listing names, dates, and cryptic notes like "too thin" or "kept screaming." The cellar revealed hooks bolted into the walls and drains carved into the floor. The Bordens were charged with multiple counts of murder, though no full count of victims could be determined. On March 12, 1810, Ezekiel, Martha, and Mary Borden were hanged in the town square. Crowds gathered, eager to see the family that had haunted their county for over a decade. Before the noose tightened, Ezekiel smiled and said, "There's more than you'll ever find." Mary, unrepentant, spat at the executioner. Martha whispered something no one could hear. After their deaths, the farm was abandoned. But locals swore that on certain nights, lantern light could be seen moving through the marsh, and the air would fall silent, just as it had that night in 1803.